The morning sun bled softly through the blinds of a modest home on the edge of town, casting thin golden stripes across the kitchen table. Malik Johnson sat with a mug of black coffee, his shoulders slightly hunched, but his posture still carrying a quiet dignity. The linoleum floor creaked under his chair when he shifted, and on the counter behind him, his daughter Amira's textbooks sat stacked in neat piles. She was upstairs, her laughter faintly echoing as she rummaged through drawers for the sweater she insisted was lucky. Malik glanced at his shoes resting by the door. The leather was cracked and the soles uneven, worn down by years of double shifts at the auto shop. He ran a thumb along the scuffed edge, sighing not from shame, but from a memory of all the bills those shoes had walked him through. Those shoes had carried him into hospital waiting rooms, where his late wife battled illness. They had paced the halls of the school during Amira's science fairs, and trudged home late at night, when exhaustion ached his bones, but quitting wasn't an option. Upstairs, Amira's footsteps thudded down. She entered the kitchen with a brightness that seemed to soften even Malik's most tired mornings. "You promised," she teased, her eyes narrowing playfully. Malik smiled faintly, his lips tugging into a grin he reserved only for her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her eyes scanned it, widening at the bold letters. STEM Summer Program. Acceptance confirmed. Amira squealed, throwing her arms around his neck. Malik held her close, closing his eyes as though anchoring himself to this moment. She was everything he worked for, the embodiment of the future he wanted to carve out, free from the shadows of the world that had once pushed him down. "Tonight," Malik said, his voice steady but warm, "we're celebrating. You pick the place." Amira's face lit with a mischievous spark. "That new restaurant downtown. Everyone's been talking about it." Malik hesitated for a brief second. He'd driven past the gleaming glass doors and polished signboards before, the kind of place that didn't seem meant for people like him. But then he looked at his daughter, the pride in her eyes, the excitement brimming. He nodded slowly. "All right then. Tonight, we'll celebrate properly." The day moved in a rhythm of its own. Malik fixing engines at the shop, Amira at school buzzing with congratulations. When the evening finally came, Malik dressed with quiet care. His shirt was pressed, though its collar had softened with age. His shoes, though battered, were polished until the leather reflected the dim glow of the hallway light. Amira emerged in her favorite dress, simple but radiant on her. She looked at her father's shoes and frowned. "Dad, maybe—" He cut her off gently with a hand on her shoulder. "These shoes carried me here. They'll carry us tonight, too." Together, they stepped out into the night, the air crisp, the small town streets buzzing faintly with neon signs and distant music. Malik held his daughter's hand as they walked toward the restaurant, the glow of chandeliers spilling onto the sidewalk through spotless glass. For a moment, Malik allowed himself to believe that tonight could be ordinary, a father and daughter celebrating, nothing more. But in his chest, somewhere beneath his composure, a quiet unease stirred. He had lived long enough to recognize the subtle tremors that precede a storm. The restaurant glowed like a beacon against a dark stretch of Main Street, its glass doors polished to perfection, its brass handles gleaming like something untouchable. Inside, laughter and the faint clinking of wine glasses carried through the walls, a sound meant to signal refinement but to Malik carried the faint edge of exclusion. Still, he pushed the door open with a steady hand, holding it for Amira, who walked in with her chin slightly raised, as though determined to claim the moment for herself. The dining room was a study in polished surfaces, white linen draped across tables, chandeliers spilling light across leather booths, servers in crisp uniforms gliding between customers who were already settled in. Malik paused, scanning the room, then walked forward with Amira at his side. The hostess, a young woman with a polite but practiced smile, looked him up and down, her gaze briefly flickering to Malik's shoes before snapping back up. The smile never wavered, but something in her tone cooled. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked. "Yes," Malik replied calmly. "Johnson, for two." She clicked through her screen, her eyes narrowing slightly as though surprised to find his name listed. "Right. This way." As they followed her through the maze of tables, Malik caught the briefest glance from a couple seated nearby. A man and woman in tailored clothes, their expressions neutral, but their eyes scanning him as if measuring whether he belonged. Malik placed a hand lightly at Amira's back, guiding her forward, reminding himself that tonight was for her, not for their judgment. The hostess seated them near the center of the dining room. Malik took his seat without hesitation, unfolding his napkin carefully across his lap. Amira's face shone with excitement as she scanned the menu, whispering the names of dishes that sounded like they belonged on a cooking show. Malik smiled, watching her joy like it was its own feast. That was when the waiter arrived. Ethan, young, maybe mid-20s, his hair slicked back too tightly, his smile crooked with something other than hospitality. He leaned closer to the table, his eyes dragging down to Malik's shoes, lingering there longer than politeness would ever allow. "Well," Ethan said, voice pitched just enough in nearby tables to hear. "Hope you can afford the menu. Some of these dishes cost more than those shoes." His laughter cut sharp against the quiet murmur of the restaurant, and a few chuckles rose from nearby tables. Amira's smile faltered instantly, her eyes dropping to her lap. She shifted in her seat, her cheeks burning. Malik, however, did not flinch. His hands stayed folded neatly on the table, his face calm, his eyes locked on the waiters with steadiness that seemed to make Ethan uncomfortable in his own skin. "I'll have water," Malik said evenly. "Two, please." Ethan smirked but walked off, his stride carrying a little swagger, as if proud of the scene he created. Malik exhaled slowly, turning to his daughter. He reached under the table, covering her trembling hand with his own. "Look at me," he said softly. She lifted her eyes, glassy but fierce. He smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "You belong here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Amira nodded, blinking back tears, trying to steady herself in the warmth of his composure. Across the room, the manager Bradley Kent watched from a bar, his arms crossed, his mouth tight. He was a man who prided himself on maintaining standards, though what those standards truly meant was visible in the way his gaze narrowed at Malik's presence. He leaned over, whispering to the server. Moments later, Ethan reappeared, his smirk more pronounced, carrying not the water Malik requested, but the simmering hostility of an establishment that had already decided they didn't belong. The quiet hostility was no longer a murmur. It was a pulse, steady and unmistakable, vibrating through every stare, every whisper. Malik felt it, like the prickle of heat on the back of his neck, but he stayed still, his posture firm, his hand never leaving his daughter's. This was not the celebration he promised. This was the storm he had sensed. The water never came. Instead, Ethan returned with Bradley Kent walking 2 steps behind him. The manager's suit was pressed sharp enough to look like armor, but his smile was thin, brittle, more condescending than cordial. He placed both palms on the edge of the table, leaning in as though Malik and Amira were children misbehaving in a room meant for adults. "Mr. Johnson, is it?" Bradley's voice was coated with politeness that rang hollow. "I'm afraid there's been a small issue with your reservation." Malik looked up at him calmly, his hand still resting on the folded napkin. "Issue?" "Yes," Bradley said, nodding slowly, though his eyes flickered briefly to Malik's shoes before returning to his face. "It seems your table was double booked. But don't worry. We'd be happy to recommend another establishment just down the street. A diner more casual. I think you and your daughter might be more comfortable there." The words landed like stones in the silence that followed. Conversations around the dining room faltered. Amira's chest tightened, her breath catching as humiliation burned through her cheeks. She glanced toward her father, waiting, terrified of what he might do. But Malik did not raise his voice. He did not shift in his seat. His eyes stayed steady, his face composed, as if carved from patience itself. "We'll finish our meal here," he said simply, each word carrying the weight of quiet defiance. Bradley's smile thinned further, the mask beginning to crack. He glanced at Ethan, whose smirk grew, feeding on the tension. "Sir," Bradley pressed, lowering his voice, "this isn't negotiable. We have certain standards here. Now, I don't want to make a scene." "You already have," Malik interrupted, his tone still calm, almost soft. But the words carried like a bell through the dining room. Several patrons shifted in their seats. A woman 2 tables over glanced at her husband, her lips pressed into a line of discomfort. Another young couple stared openly, phones in their hands, one of them subtly beginning to record. Bradley's jaw tightened. His hands left the table and smoothed the front of his suit jacket, as though gathering what remained of his authority. "Security," he called out, his voice sharper now. Two men in black uniforms appeared from the side of the dining room, their presence heavy, deliberate. They moved closer, their expressions impassive but their intent clear. Amira's hand shook on the table, her body tense, but Malik squeezed her fingers gently, a steady rhythm that told her, "I'm here. Don't be afraid." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you and your daughter to leave," one of the guards said, his voice flat. Malik rose slowly, not with shame but with a deliberate dignity that seemed to challenge every eye watching. He adjusted his jacket, glanced down at his daughter, and nodded for her to stand beside him. Amira's legs felt weak, but she lifted herself, clutching his arm, her chin trembling but raised. They walked together toward the door, flanked by the guards, the murmur of whispers swelling in their wake. Some patrons looked away, complicit in their silence. Others stared with discomfort, guilt flickering in their eyes. One woman clutched her pearls tightly, as though the sight of Malik and his daughter was a disruption she had paid not to see. As they reached the exit, Ethan Smirker turned, barely contained, a cruel satisfaction written across his face. Amira caught it, her eyes brimming, but Malik kept his gaze forward, refusing to give him the satisfaction of acknowledgement. The glass doors opened, and the night air hit them cold. Malik stepped onto the sidewalk with his daughter at his side, the warm glow of the restaurant falling away behind them. He paused only once, glancing back at a room full of faces pressed at their tables, pretending to resume their meals. He held the gaze not of Bradley, not of Ethan, but a few who watched in silence, their discomfort heavy, but their voices absent. Then he turned, guiding Amira down the sidewalk. Her tears finally spilled over, but Malik's face remained composed, unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed the storm within. The humiliation was sharp, undeniable, but so was the resolve that quietly, steadily, began to rise in him. The house was still, the quiet pressing down on Malik like an unwelcome guest. Amira had gone to bed early, her bedroom door shut softly, her sobs muffled beneath the hum of her radio. Malik sat alone at the kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing faintly above him. His jacket lay draped across the back of the chair, his shoes, those same worn, scuffed shoes, resting by the door as though they had walked their last mile that night. He stared at his hands. Calloused, oil-stained, the hands of a mechanic. They looked nothing like the hands that used to sign contracts, move markets, shift numbers on screens that carried the weight of millions. He rubbed his palms together slowly, as if trying to remember what they once felt like when they held power. Finally, he stood and crossed to the hall closet. From the top shelf, beneath folded blankets and boxes of old photographs, he pulled out a weathered leather briefcase. Dust rose in the air as he sat on the table, the metallic click of its clasps echoing louder than the silence. Inside, the artifacts of another life lay waiting. Framed certificates, licenses, degrees, commendations. Contracts with signatures that once opened doors in high-rise buildings he no longer entered. Malik lifted a document, its edges curled with time. Series 7 certification. Beneath it, a letter from a prestigious investment firm, the logo faded but still recognizable. He had been their rising star, a black man in finance who broke ceilings others swore were made of steel. Malik's jaw tightened as memories surfaced. The meeting room, cold and white, the board table lined with men who looked nothing like him, their smiles fixed as he presented evidence of discriminatory lending practices. Black families denied loans for homes and businesses, while less qualified white clients were approved with ease. The fallout had been swift, merciless. His accounts were reassigned, his reputation stained with whispers of troublemaker. Within a year, his career was gone. The life he built for his wife, for Amira, was dismantled brick by brick. And yet he had survived, shift by shift, bolt by bolt, pay kick by pay kick. Until now, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His reflection stared at him from the darkened window above the sink. It wasn't a reflection of a man broken. It was a man tempered, sharpened by years of quiet survival. Malik reached for his phone, scrolling through the contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in nearly a decade. His thumb hovered over it, his chest tightening. Then he pressed. On the second ring, a voice answered, familiar yet distant. Malik Johnson. I'll be damned. I didn't think I'd hear from you again. Yeah, Malik said quietly, his voice steady, deliberate. I think it's time I cash in that favor. There was a pause on the line, then a low chuckle. You always were patient. Tell me what you need. Malik closed the briefcase, his hand firm on the worn leather, his mind sharpened, each thought falling into place with the precision of a strategist who had waited too long in the shadows. Tonight wasn't just about humiliation. It was about the lesson given to his daughter, that she did not belong. That message he knew could not stand. He looked toward the hallway where Amira slept. His eyes softened, but his resolve hardened. This fight wasn't for him. It was for her, for the next time she walked into a room and held her head high. For the moment, no one dared laugh at the shoes on her father's feet. The storm had begun in that restaurant, but Malik had weathered worse. And now, for the first time in years, he felt the weight shift, not crushing him, but pressing him forward. The glow of Amira's phone lit her face in the darkness of her room. She hadn't been able to sleep, her chest still heavy with the humiliation of being escorted out of the restaurant. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the photos and videos she'd taken earlier in the night. Snapshots of the table setting, a blurry picture of her father's smile when he first sat down. But one file stopped her cold, a short video clip captured by another diner, sent to her by a classmate who whispered, "This is blowing up." In it, her father's calm voice cut to the dining room, steady, unshaken. "We'll finish our meal here." The camera tilted toward Bradley's tight smile, Ethan's smirk, and finally the two security guards flanking Malik and Amira as they were forced out under the fluorescent glow of chandeliers. Amira uploaded the clip to her social media with only one caption. "We were told we didn't belong here. My dad kept his dignity. Watch for yourself." By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. By noon, tens of thousands. The clip traveled fast, ricocheting across timelines and group chats, weaving into news feed with captions like, "Black father and daughter escorted out of restaurant for their appearance," and "Humiliation caught on camera sparks outrage." The town felt smaller under the weight of attention. At the auto shop, Malik worked quietly beneath a car hood while his co-workers murmured about the video they'd seen that morning. Customers arrived not for oil changes, but to peer curious at the man who had gone viral overnight. Some offered quiet words of support. "Saw what they did to you, brother. Stay strong." Others leaned against counters, their skepticism thinly veiled. "You sure there's not more to the story?" By afternoon, local activists stood outside the restaurant, holding signs scrawled with sharp black letters. "Dignity isn't a dress code. We belong." Chants echoed down Main Street, drawing cameras, reporters, and counter voices. A group of men from the neighboring county showed up too, muttering about overreactions and people playing the race card. Malik stayed silent through it all, his focus steady on tightening bolts, his mind moving elsewhere. But inside, a storm brewed. He hadn't wanted Amira's video to spread this far, hadn't wanted their private humiliation turned into public spectacle. And yet, watching her in the living room that night, scrolling through the comments, her back straighter, her voice louder when she read words of encouragement, he realized it wasn't just their story anymore. It had become everyone's. The corporate office of the restaurant chain released a statement 2 days later. It was polished, cold, carefully worded. "We regret any misunderstanding at our downtown location. Our staff acted in accordance with company policy, and we are reviewing procedures to ensure all guests feel comfortable dining with us." It was supposed to close the book. Instead, it fanned the fire. Local reporters requested interviews. A national morning show called, offering a seat on their couch. Amira pleaded with her father. "We should tell them, Dad. People need to know." Malik shook his head, his voice even. Truth has a way of speaking for itself. We don't need to shout. But truth, it seemed, shouted on its own. That weekend, Another video surfaced, this one from a former employee of the chain. Shaky cell phone footage of Bradley in the kitchen, rolling his eyes as he muttered, "They walk in with their ragged shoes and expect 5-star treatment. Not on my watch." The clip cracked the corporate statement wide open. Protesters doubled in number. National outlets flooded the small town, their vans lined along the curbs. Some people welcomed the attention. Others cursed it for making the town look bad. Malik walked home from work that night, the street lamps flickering above him, the cool air thick with tension. A group of teenagers drove past, leaning out the window to shout, "We're with you, man!" Another car rolled by slower, a middle-aged man shaking his head, muttering, "You're stirring up trouble." When Malik reached his porch, he found Amira waiting with 2 women from a local advocacy group. They looked at him with expectation, with urgency. "People are ready to stand behind you," one said, "but they need you to lead." Malik looked past them, through the window into his own home. His wife's photo hung above the mantel, her smile frozen in time, her eyes forever alive. He thought of Amira, of the shoes that had carried him here, of the voices rising louder each day. He felt the weight pressing against him, but this time it wasn't meant to crush. It was meant to lift. He nodded once, slowly. "Then we do this the right way." The church basement smelled faintly of old hymnals and coffee grounds, its fluorescent lights flickering overhead as folding chairs scraped against the concrete floor. Around the table sat a mix of faces, a civil rights attorney from Atlanta who had driven down after watching the video, a local pastor who had marched 50 years earlier and never stopped, a young activist with a laptop glowing in front of her, and Malik at the head, his posture calm but commanding. Stacks of papers spread across the table. Employee testimonies, leaked emails, corporate policy documents that the attorney flipped through with sharpened pencil in hand. The young activist pulled up charts on wage disparities between black and white employees across the restaurant chain's regional branches. Patterns emerged, ugly and undeniable. Malik sat quietly, listening more than he spoke, his hands folded before him. When the room grew heated, when the activist slammed her laptop shut, her voice trembling with rage, when the pastor muttered prayers under his breath, Malik steadied them all with a single glance, a calm baritone that reminded them this wasn't about noise but precision. "We can't rush this," he said, his eyes steady on the attorney. "If we come at them loud, they'll drown us out. We need to be exact, surgical, every number, every voice, every receipt." The attorney nodded slowly. "You sound like someone who's done this before." Malik didn't answer. He reached into his briefcase, sliding across a folder filled with stock purchase confirmations. Small but deliberate acquisitions he had begun making the week after the incident. His old contact from Atlanta had helped set up a shell investment group, a quiet entry into the very structure that had humiliated him. The attorney's eyebrows rose. "You're not just fighting them," she murmured. "You're buying them." Malik leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Power doesn't argue. It just shifts hands. And when it does, everyone feels it. The plan crystallized in that dim basement. The attorney would file suit against the restaurant for discrimination, backed by testimony from former employees who were now stepping forward, emboldened by the video. The activists would coordinate a digital campaign, gathering thousands of signatures and circulating leaked corporate memos showing systemic profiling. The pastor would organize community forums, keeping the protests alive but peaceful, grounding them in faith and discipline. And Malik, he would keep buying, quietly, methodically, until the leverage was undeniable. Weeks turned into months. Malik spent his days under car hoods, his nights poring over financial reports and stock performance. He spoke little at home, but Amira began to notice the shift. His eyes carried not just exhaustion but focus, a sharpness she hadn't seen since her mother's passing. Meanwhile, the chain's executives scrambled, lawsuits stacked against them. News outlets broadcast damning interviews with former waitstaff who spoke of managers instructing them to seat black families in the back or watch their tabs. The shallow corporate apologies grew thinner, less convincing. Shareholders grew restless. Then came the tipping point. A leaked internal report showing profits slipping, not from food or service, but from reputational damage. Malik read the line 3 times, a quiet smile forming at the corner of his mouth. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the small town, Malik stood on his porch with Amira. She leaned against a railing, scrolling through her phone, reading aloud the headlines. Civil rights lawsuit targets restaurant chain. Community leader calls for ownership reform. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of pride and disbelief. Dad, this is you, isn't it? You're behind all of this. Malik didn't answer right away. He slipped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Sometimes, he said softly, the best way to answer an insult is not with words. It's with change they can't ignore. Amira rested her head against him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. Pride, love, awe. In the silence between them, the faint sound of protest chants drifted from downtown. Malik listened, his face calm, his hands steady. He was no longer just a man with worn-out shoes. He was a man laying the foundation for something bigger, brick by brick, share by share. The counterattack had begun. It was only a matter of time before the whole town would see what dignity, discipline, and patience could build. The ballroom of the downtown hotel gleamed with polished chandeliers, but the air inside was tense, thick with whispers and sidelong glances. Rows of shareholders filled the velvet seats, their eyes shifting uneasily between the stage and their papers. On the long mahogany table at the front sat the executives of the restaurant chain, pressed suits, pearl necklaces, and practiced smiles that looked thinner with every passing week. At the center was Mr. Whitaker, the chain's regional president, his silver hair combed neatly back, his smirk the same one Malik remembered from that humiliating night. He tapped the microphone twice, leaning forward with a self-satisfied chuckle. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us not be distracted by this noise," he said, referring to the lawsuits, the protests, the chants outside that seeped through the ballroom doors. "This company has served family for decades. We will weather the storm." Applause rose from a few loyalists in the room, but it was half-hearted. Then came the sound of doors opening at the back. Every head turned. Malik entered quietly, dressed in a tailored navy suit. His steps were slow, steady, the kind of stride that didn't need permission. Amira walked beside him, holding a folder of documents close to her chest, her chin lifted with pride. The room hushed. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "What is he doing here?" he muttered to the board chair. "He doesn't belong." But Malik didn't wait to be acknowledged. He walked straight to the front row, placed a thick stack of binders on the table, and then, calm as ever, spoke into the microphone. "With all due respect, Mr. Whitaker, I believe the shareholders have the right to know who owns this company now." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Cameras clicked from the press pool at the back. Malik opened his folder, sliding out document after document. Proof of acquisition, share certificates, transfer agreements. Each page landed like a gavel strike. "I have, over the last 6 months," Malik continued, his baritone even, "acquired a controlling interest in this chain. I didn't shout in the streets. I didn't throw stones. I bought seats at this very table. And now," he turned, looking squarely at Whitaker, "I own more of this business than anyone sitting here." The silence was electric. Executives shuffled in their chairs, pale under the chandelier light. Whitaker's smirk cracked. He leaned forward, trying to regain control. "This is absurd," he spat. "A man like you—" The words hung in the air, unfinished but sharp. The crowd heard it anyway. Malik let it sit, the ugliness of it filling the silence like smoke. Then he straightened. "Yes, a man like me, a mechanic, a father, a black man who was told his money wasn't good enough to buy a meal in his own town. That same man now decides the future of this brand." The applause started small, from the back row, where a group of young activists stood, fists low but firm. Then the sound grew, spreading through the ballroom until it was a thunderous standing ovation. Reporters jotted furiously, flashes exploding as Malik remained steady, dignified, his expression calm amid the storm. Whitaker tried to shout over the noise, his face flushed red, but no one was listening. The power had shifted, not through anger, not through violence, but through patience, strategy, and an unbreakable will. Malik raised a hand, and the room fell into quiet again. His voice carried like scripture. This company will not just change menus or paint over cracks. It will change policies. It will change hiring. It will reflect the community it profits from. Because dignity is not negotiable. And as long as I am here, neither is justice. Amira watched her father from the side of the stage, her eyes wet with pride. She remembered the night she had tugged at his sleeve in that restaurant, humiliated and small. And now he stood tall, commanding a room full of power brokers who once would not even serve him a plate of food. The ballroom erupted again, reporters surging forward, shareholders rising to shake his hand. Malik did not smile. He simply nodded, his eyes steady, his posture calm. He wasn't here for applause. He was here for change. And in that moment, under the bright lights and the echo of cheers, everyone in the room knew he had already won. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the city in a warm amber glow. From the rooftop of his modest office downtown, Malik stood with his hands resting on the railing, looking out at the streets below. The chants had quieted, the headlines had shifted, but the change was still alive, carried in the conversations of families at dinner tables, in the cautious hope of workers who once felt invisible. Amira joined him, setting 2 steaming cups of tea on the ledge. She leaned against the railing, her head tilted slightly toward him. For the first time in months, her smile was easy, unburdened. "You did it, Dad," she said softly. Malik shook his head, a quiet laugh slipping out. "No," he replied. "We did it." Every protester outside those doors, every worker who told their story, every journalist who refused to look away. I just carried the papers into the room. The city hummed below them. Car horns, voices, a child's laughter carried on the breeze. For Malik, those sounds were a reminder of what this was always about. Dignity, not revenge. He thought back to that night in the restaurant, the way the waiter had sneered at his shoes, the way his daughter's eyes had filled with shame. That memory had burned inside him, yes, but it was not humiliation that brought him here. It was love. Love for her. Love for a world where she would never again be made to feel less than. Amira sipped her tea, her voice thoughtful. "Do you think they'll change? Really change?" Malik turned to her, his gaze steady. "They already have. They were forced to sit and listen. They were forced to see us. Change starts there. The rest we'll keep fighting for." The rooftop door creaked open, and a group of young employees stepped out. Waiters, cooks, hostesses. Faces Malik had seen in news clips. Faces that had once looked defeated but now carried quiet pride. One of them, a young black waitress in her early 20s, approached him. "Mr. Johnson," she said nervously, her voice trembling. I wanted to thank you. For all of us, we thought we didn't matter. Now we know we do." Malik placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice low but firm. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll never let anyone tell you different again." Her eyes filled, and she nodded. Behind her, the group broke into soft applause. Amira watched her father, her chest swelling with pride. He was not just her hero now. He belonged to something larger, something bigger than the both of them. The sun dipped further, casting long shadows across the rooftop. Malik lifted his cup, the steam curling into the cooling air. For the first time in years, his shoulders eased, his breath steady. He had taken shame they tried to hand him and turned it into power. He had rewritten the story, not just for himself, but for his daughter, for every worker dismissed as nothing more than their clothes, their color, their station in life. As the first streetlights flickered on, Malik closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the sound of the city wash over him. He knew the fight wasn't over. It never would be, but for night, he allowed himself peace. When he opened his eyes, Amira was watching him, her smile soft. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "Come on," he said, his voice calm, steady, resolute. "We've got work to do." And together, father and daughter stood beneath the fading light, 2 figures silhouetted against the skyline, no longer invisible, no longer small. A testament to quiet strength, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with shout, but with a steady, unshakable resolve.